Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jitendra Shah. I am the Special Project Facilitator at ADB. This afternoon, I would like to talk to you about ADB's accountability mechanism, what it means, why is this important, and why we all need to work together to achieve our common objective. So, let's get started. Accountability is important for everybody, but it means different things to different people. As far as ADB is concerned, it means two things. Number one, address problems that are brought to our attention for ADB supported projects. Number two, ensure compliance with ADB's policies and procedures. So, relatively 150-page document summarized in two simple sentences. Now, why is this important? It is important because of the people in this picture. They are our real bosses, children of Asia. We have to be responsible to them, and we allow them to bring up the complaint in case we don't get something right. So, this is very important. Now, why is this important? First and foremost, we are trying to solve the problem that may have occurred to the people on the ground. But more importantly, we need to improve our development effectiveness of the portfolio. We also need to improve the quality of individual projects, and as a learning institution, we need to learn from the mistakes of the past, so that we do not repeat it, and more importantly, we improve our project design to make our projects better. So, learning is very important. So, as I described in the policy statement, we have two functions. One can be summarized as problem solving and the other as compliance review. The problem solving office reports directly to the president, while the compliance review reports to the board, and we have a complaint receiving officer for all the complaints. Now, the process. Who can complain? Anybody who is harmed by ADB project can complain, but it must be more than two people. So, two or more people can complain. What can they complain about? They can complain about any harm that ADB project may have caused to them or their family or to the environment, and most importantly, potential harm that might occur in the future. In terms of when can they complain, they have up to 2 years after the project closes. So, during the project implementation and up to 2 years after the project closing. Now, the process of complaint. So, instead of talking about the procedure in terms of step 1, step 2, let me give you a couple examples. The first one is the Nepal rural infrastructure. This is a infrastructure project in rural hills of Nepal. I think there are about 18 remote communities. They have learned from our past, and they have proceeded with a very participatory approach. They have discussed the project with everybody. They have discussed the land donation, because that's the way they do things in Nepal. There is a supposedly a well established grievance redress mechanism, and overall there are only 80 affected households. So, it's relatively small project, relatively small community, and yet we had a complaint. The complaint came because one of the families, two people in the family, the son and the daughter, they felt that their parents or their father specifically was coerced into giving the land. So, when we investigated the complaint, we found out that yes, while the consultation in general was adequate, it did not give all the information. There was some sort of a slight coercion, a community coercion, because everybody was told that land donation is the way you do things in Nepal. So, everybody donated the land, while many people had the option of getting compensation for the land. If they were taking a lot of the land away, or if they were taking a land right in the middle of the their property and the other side of the property became economically unviable, they should be compensated for that. So, a lot of these details were not worked out. Also about complaints, there were no records kept about the complaint processes because they were proud that they like to solve the complaint before they have to write it. Now, what is interesting here in this particular case is by just going there and talking to people, respecting people and discussing openly and honestly about their complaints to see what exactly is the matter and how it can be resolved, talking to the government, talking to the engineers, and then bringing everybody together to say, okay, we have a community road. This will help you in general. So, what is doable, what can you live with, what can you not live with, and then within 1 week we were able to solve one particular complaint that we had, but also 7 other complaints were solved. And we hope that because of our work, this will not go to the compliance review. Let me give you another example also related to resettlement, but a much larger project. Now, here is the project about Cambodia railway rehabilitation. It started with about $43 million project. It got more money later, about 15,000 affected people. So, we saw in Nepal case there were 80 families. Here there were 15,000 families from one end of the country to the other end of the country on the railway. There were 4,000 people who had to be resettled, and the problem was they had no titles. Many of them are living right on the railway, and so they had to be consulted and they had to be dealt with. The complaint came from about 155 people, so a much smaller subsection of the people who were impacted. And their complaints were that they were not consulted properly, there was no information given, and overall there was unwillingness of the authorities to deal with them, to help them. And this is an interesting point, and I will come back to it in a minute. Now, what is important here is that because the railway project is long, the resettlement plan and the quality of these plans changed over time. The local government did not understand ADB policies well, so they did not understand that they had to be resettled according to ADB policy. The index rate in terms of the rate for resettlement compensation was calculated in many cases erroneously, or there were a lot of mistakes. If somebody had 2-story house, the compensation was only for 1 story. If they had a concrete house, it was treated more like a shack, and they were given compensation for that. So, there was a lot of problem with the indexation. There was a poor overall public consultation with the people. The grievance redress mechanism was not developed properly. And what was important to note was the local government did not have the capacity to deal with it. So, it is not as if that they were unwilling to help, they did not know how to help. They had not done such a complex project, they had not done necessarily such a big program. So, they were not able to deal with it. What is important is when our office came there, we were able to sit together with these 155 families one at a time and come up with a solution with the government which was acceptable to all the 155 families. So, we did solve the problem for 155 families, but because 15,000 people were affected, it went to the compliance review because there were systematic issues related to resettlement and how this is done in Cambodia. Now, let us look at the overall complaint that we have received over the last 10 years or 12 years by sector. So, overall we have received 58 complaints, out of which 23 were eligible, and majority 10 of them have come from the transport sector, 7 from water, municipal supply, 3 from energy, etc. So, this is the distribution by sector. Now, if you look at the complaints by the region, your region, Central and West Asia, has received 7 eligible complaints, the South Asia 5, the Southeast Asia 8, and East Asia 2, with the Pacific 1. So, this is the distribution by region. Actually, the Central and West has received the maximum number of complaints, only 7 were deemed eligible. So, if you look at the 53 complaints, I think about 25 of them came from Central and West. It is just that you had a lot of ineligible complaints. Now, what are the people complaining about? This particular chart is very important. As we saw in the case of transport sector, because it covers a lot of ground, it covers a lot of area, lot of communities, there is a lot of resettlement, and resettlement is the biggest number of issue or a topic that is raised in complaint. Almost 32% of the time, the resettlement, land acquisition and the compensation rate is an issue. Now, second thing is a little bit disturbing in a way. Lack of information is raised almost 17% of the time. Lack of information. This is relatively simple and we ought to be doing better at it, and you in this room should be able to help us do this better. The third is interesting, is the consultation and participation of people. To us, this is the key issue in order for you to get your project done well on the ground. As you know, you are close to the people who are directly affected. If you consult with them, if you get them to participate more, then you will have a higher chance of success. So, we think that that's very important. Now, for you guys in the room, I am told you are from the environmental background, environment safeguards. Environmental safeguard, agriculture, natural resources, this issue actually is the third biggest complaint issues in terms of about 14.6 or 15% of the time. And we will look into that just a little bit now. As far as environmental issues are concerned, the complaints relate to number one, lack of proper mitigation plan. Number two, non-disclosure of the EIA, or maybe it's disclosed but it's disclosed in such a way that nobody can get to it. Violation of not only local environmental regulations but also ADB policies. Things like seepage and leakage of harmful substances, whether it is a harmful metal or hazardous chemical. There was a big case about wastewater treatment facility and how this will impact on agriculture fertility of the local community and how it will destroy the natural beauty of the area. And actually, that particular complaint went all the way and the project was stopped. The other common issue for a lot of the project is air pollution impact on the local community. So, things like energy project, cold handling, ash handling and the proximity to the villages, the water quality impact because of the coal dust or the ash, etc. Now, I talked about the consultation and participation and importance of it. So, let me tell you about a story. When I visited Dhaka, Bangladesh about 20 years ago and came up with a beautiful solution to the air pollution problem in Dhaka city. And I was greeted with a very stern statement saying, over my dead body, by a elderly gentleman with a white flowing beard. So, he stroked his beard and said, over my dead body. Imagine how my team felt. We worked very hard. We looked at their technical problem. We compared their air pollution and looked at the solution. We found that they had 50,000 small three-wheelers that were two-stroke engine. They were killer machines. Even though they were supposed to be providing transportation, they were actually killing people. And they were responsible for approximately 10,000 excess deaths per year. On the other side, the new technology was available, the new taxis were available, and yet people were forced to use their lungs to clean the air instead of allowing newer technology to come in. The reason this is important is because through the consultation over the next 3 years, through the media and through biweekly stories and educating people about why we were trying to do this, we were able to win one group at a time to our side. We were able to convince the baby taxi or the three-wheeler drivers to say, do you want to use your lungs to clean the air, or should you think that your boss should buy a new three-wheeler? Once they understood what was happening to them, they all agreed that it's a better idea to get rid of this 50,000 killing machine. So, at the end of the 3 years, instead of us telling them what to do, they were saying, can we do this quickly? So, dream outcomes are possible if you involve local people and consult with them and have them to participate in your program. So, here is a summary slide that talks about what we have learned over the last 12 years. First and foremost, involuntary resettlement is very, very sensitive. So make sure you have a good grievance redress mechanism on the ground. Number 2, do not delay solving the problem. What happens is, if you have a small problem here, then you might have a small problem in the next village and the next village and the next village, and pretty soon some smart person will come and politicize the whole issue. And once politics gets in the act, people do not necessarily want to then solve the problem, because they want to keep their political issues alive. So early attention is extremely important, and you will have a much higher chances of success. As we talked about, consultation and participation is phenomenally important. You must have a communication strategy that talks about how you're going to involve people, why and when, and how you will inform them about everything that you are doing. The next point is important. As you saw, that we had about 50% of the complaints were ineligible. But even when the complaints were ineligible, there was a lot that we could learn from them. We could understand what are the issues that people have, and we could solve those issues, resolve those issues before they become a complaint. And last but not the least, the local NGOs have a crucial role. Sometimes ADB staff are allergic to NGOs. They don't want to deal with them, but that is not appropriate, because they are actually your friend. They can actually help you solve the problem on the ground. Now, I will end with the last slide that talks about ADB's international rating or transparency rating by a British rating agency, and ADB is ranked as very good, is 5th from the top, and I'll say it softly, we are better than the World Bank. So now, because I'm not there, if you have any questions, easy ones, you can send me an email, and if you have a difficult question, you can ask Feng. She's very capable, she can answer all your questions. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good workshop. If you need more information about accountability mechanism and our cases, you can also go to the ADB website and you can find it there. Thank you and have a good workshop.